Okay, so today we're going to do photosynthesis, and it will be in 3 parts so that the videos are a little bit shorter and they'll load onto YouTube. First part is going to be about the introduction to photosynthesis and understanding the main two phases. So photosynthesis, it's in the chloroplast. Okay, and the chloroplast is the organelle inside of plant cells that does photosynthesis, so this is plants only. And if you look inside of a plant cell, you get your cell wall, you get your membrane, you have your nucleus. There's only one nucleus, okay? But everything else, there's many, many, many of them. So mitochondria, ribosomes, Golgi, there's excessive amounts. So the chloroplast looks like a little bean, and it's inside of the plant cell. But if you were to look, it wouldn't be just one. Okay, so we're going to talk about just one, because what happens in just one happens in all the other ones. Okay, now if we look at a plant has organs and different parts and pieces. So you have the ground. Above ground, you're going to have the stem, and then you're going to have branches, and you're going to have leaves and potentially flowers, depending on the type of plant. Underground, you're going to have all the different root systems. So we've got tap roots, and those are just like giant roots, carrots, potatoes. They're just one big root, and they store sugar. And then you got all these little fibrous roots, and that's like when you pull up the grass or a plant out of the ground and it pulls this huge mass of dirt with it. Those fibrous roots help hold on to the soil, but their whole job is to get the water and to bring it up the plant. And we've talked about this a million times, but moving that water up against gravity gets started here in the leaves. All right, the leaves are an organ, and their main job is to absorb light. And they're going to absorb all that light and turn it into food. So light goes in, and it makes food, and out comes oxygen. So oxygen is their waste product. And we exhale carbon dioxide, but they actually inhale it. Basically, they don't breathe it in with lungs, but inhale in the sense that they bring it into their leaves along with this light, and then the water coming up. And from that, they're going to make their food, and then they're going to release oxygen because that's their waste product. The food that they make is in the form of what? All right, so the food that they make is in the form of glucose. So glucose is C6H12O6. Okay, so that's their whole purpose, because they can't run out to the grocery store and grab something to eat. They have to make their food. And when they make their food, it's not like they're in the kitchen cooking. They literally have to create it. So to make it might even be the wrong word. They create glucose from literally the atmosphere and the water. So they get the CO2 from us, or from cars, or from any type of combustion, and then they add it with water that they bring in from their roots. And from these two reactants, and then you add light. So light is the ingredient that is so important, because that's what turns this carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen, okay, C, H, and O, into this beautiful molecule called sugar. So they take the exhale of your breath, or the exhale of a car, plus the water in the ground, and they turn it into sugar. So it's like a huge magic trick. And then they have a little bit of oxygen left over. So because of that little bit of oxygen, we have oxygen in our atmosphere. All right? So photosynthesis, and I know that this board doesn't get very clean, but photosynthesis is going to happen in 2 stages, okay? So first stage is called the light reaction. Because science is annoying this way, it could be called the light dependent. Depends on light. And then step 2 is called the light independent. It, or the dark reaction. And this can be confusing, reaction, because people will think, oh, it's the dark reaction, it must happen at night. No, it just happens without light. So light reaction needs light, dark reaction does not. So the better name is the light dependent, because it depends on light, or the light independent reaction. But the second step has a third name, named after the gentleman who discovered it, and it's the Calvin cycle, named after Melvin Calvin. Okay, so poor old Melvin Calvin, he was the one that discovered the cycle, and it is called a cycle because it continuously goes round and round and round. Okay, so the overall photosynthesis, okay, has 2 steps: light reaction, dark reaction, or light dependent, light independent, or we can call it Calvin cycle. And they actually refer to it as all 3. So you need to know both of these names, and then you need to know all 3 of these names. Okay, quick rundown of what goes on, and then I'm gonna do a video about just the light reaction and a video about just the dark reaction. But the main overview is this. Here is the chloroplast, and typically you see it drawn sideways like this. Okay, remember that your leaves are full of chloroplast because this is the organ that is going to be basically solar panels. You won't have a whole lot of chloroplast in the roots, and the reason you wouldn't have them is because the chloroplast depend on light, and your roots are underground. So that's why your roots usually are white, because this chloroplast is full of this green pigment called chlorophyll. And so if the plant doesn't have chlorophyll in that area, then it'll be different colors. And so your flowers, excuse me, are different colors, and it's because they're not doing photosynthesis. Only the leaves are doing photosynthesis. And then the stems have chloroplast in them because they can also help absorb light. All right, but so here in the chloroplast, there are these stacks of pancakes, and if we were to look at a true chloroplast, all right, they'd be all over the place. All right, so just be full of them. But we're only going to look at one, but what I show you in one is true in every single one that you would see. All right, and so this stack of little pancakes is called a thylakoid. All right, and they are green because they are full of chlorophyll. Sounds like chlorine, and the actual element chlorine is a gas, and it happens to be green. Now we think of chlorine in swimming pools and makes them white, but the chlorine in swimming pools is actually a compound. All right, so your thylakoid full of chlorophyll, and chlorophyll is a pigment, and pigment's job is to absorb light. All right, and so light comes into the thylakoid, and this is also where water comes in, okay? So light and water come into the thylakoid, and their waste product is oxygen, all right? So everything that happens in the thylakoid, these are the light reactions. Light reaction, okay? So that's the first step. Water and light come into the thylakoid, and I'm going to talk about everything that happens in there, and then the waste product is oxygen. But they're going to make something very important that gets sent to step 2. And step 2 is called your dark reaction. Dependent or the Calvin cycle, and it's a cycle. Okay, and it's going to cycle and it's going to churn, and it's going to make its ultimate end result, which is glucose. All right, which is, it is creating its food. So it's turning light into food. And then the missing piece is CO2, okay? So CO2 is what is needed to make all this happen. Here is your actual equation, all right? So you've got the equation for photosynthesis is water dioxide plus some form of light, we'll talk about all the different forms of light, end up making oxygen, C6H12O6, which is glucose. So this is your actual formula. So here you see the water and the light coming in, plus the carbon dioxide coming in. So all of those have arrows going in, and they are going to make oxygen and glucose, which are your products. And the actual balanced equation is 6 waters plus 6 carbon dioxides plus an abundance of light. Oxygen is O2. So we end up making 6 of those and 1 of these. Okay? So for every 1 glucose molecule that the cell makes, it needs 6 water molecules and 6 carbon dioxide molecules. So contrary to what you think, plants actually love combustion reactions, and they grow very well on the side of the road, and they grow very well where there's a lot of carbon dioxide. So they enjoy pollution in the crazy sense. And so a lot of countries and big cities have learned if we plant plants near urban areas, they'll take that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and they'll turn it into oxygen and glucose. Okay, so they enjoy this. All right, so there is your overall reaction, and this is the equation for photosynthesis. All right, so that is where we are, and so now we're going to talk about, in the next video, just what happens on the light side, and then your second video will be what happens on the dark side. But the two processes together are what give us photosynthesis.